Before we begin discussing Trouillot's 1991 piece, Anthropology and the Savage Slot, the Poetics and Politics of Otherness, which seeks to contextualize social sciences and the concept of the West, let us first take a moment to conceptualize and contextualize Trouillot himself.
Michel Rolph Trouillot was born in 1949 in Haiti to an impressive family. His father was not only a lawyer and a professor, but also a TV show host on a show about Haitian history. His mother was a judge, lawyer, and politician. I'm going to spend a little bit more time than usual talking about Trouillot himself because I think that understanding his personal context is very important to understanding his work and beliefs. Trouillot was born just 5 years after World War II ended, which likely affected his views on globalization and power as he grew up in a recovering world. Then, when he was just 5 or 6 years old, Haiti was devastated by Hurricane Hazel. The country had already been poor, but this made things far worse. Then, an elected official took advantage of the devastation caused by Hurricane Hazel, sending political opponents to jail and canceling newspapers, then refusing to leave office when his term ended. This created not only a rocky economy, but a tumultuous political structure as well. After a few years of turmoil and lack of stability in Haiti, Duvalier was elected as president of Haiti in 1957 when Trouillot was just 8 years old. He was elected on a platform centered on representing the poor. This was the beginning of the Duvalier dictatorship dynasty, which lasted into the mid-80s. This dictatorship was highly corrupt and dangerous to the citizens. Once elected, Duvalier exploited spiritual beliefs of Haitians to basically deify himself, stole money from the country, and created a secret police program which was highly oppressive. It is estimated that about 30,000 Haitians died under his rule, and many more fled the country. Trouillot was one of them in 1968 as a young adult, but Haiti and the rest of the Caribbean were still important to him for the rest of his life. It should also be noted that Haiti had a booming tourist economy on top of its history of colonization, slavery, and revolt. After leaving Haiti as a 19 or 20-year-old, Trouillot and his family became refugees in the United States. They landed in Brooklyn, New York, staying in his already poor aunt's basement. Trouillot had already been an artist and an activist in Haiti, and he continued with both passions in America. He even started a Haitian exile theater company for activism in his aunt's basement. Trouillot completed his bachelor's degree at Brooklyn College in Caribbean History and Culture in 1978. He published his first book as a non-traditional 28-year-old immigrant undergraduate student. Next, Trouillot went to Johns Hopkins University, where he earned his anthropology PhD. After that, he became a professor at Johns Hopkins and then later University of Chicago, receiving many honors and awards along the way. Throughout his career, Trouillot continued his research on the Caribbean, but he also had a lot to say about the social sciences themselves. He challenged the assumption that minority anthropologists should be native anthropologists, advocating that minority researchers like himself were capable of producing exceptional research even on cultures that they did not grow up in. According to a past graduate student of his, Trouillot emphasized comparative and historical contexts and was critical of disciplinary traditions. According to this student, Trouillot encourages young scholars to embrace, rather than shy away from, what he described as anthropology's inherent moral optimism. He also emphasized doing research out of passion, not just interest, believing that passion feeds your soul, not just your career. The book which we are reading an excerpt from was his last, making Anthropology and the Savage Slot, the Poetics and Politics of Otherness, one of the final installments of his own passions and wisdom.
Good to know! Let's dive into Anthropology and the Savage Slot. The essay begins on page 7 by advocating for archaeology of the discipline of anthropology. Although postmodernists have done some of this, Trouillot claims that they have failed to address the geography of imagination and the savage slot on page 8. Let's make sure we understand what he's talking about.
It's time to play What the Hell Is This Guy Talking About? To understand what the savage slot is, we need to know what a slot is. Is it a small skinny hole? A machine you give your money to? A promiscuous woman? Or a category used to filter knowledge and meaning? That's right, here a slot is a category used to filter knowledge and meaning. That means that Trouillot views savages and the study of them as a category. The savage slot is a sector of knowledge anthropology fills. What does Trouillot mean by geography of imagination? Does he mean a far, far away land, a thinking framework, a mental illness, or a children's game? Great job! In this context, the geography of imagination seems to be a thinking framework, sort of like habitus. It affects the things we do and do not consider. What are electoral politics in this article? Are they the way we choose our president, the structure within a field, or a Trump tweet? Awesome! Electoral politics are the structure and hierarchy within a field. This affects the askable questions, but not the structure of the field itself.
According to Trouillot, we need to change the structural issues of the field rather than simply changing the questions which we ask. This way, we can move past anthropology as the study of the savage. To do this, Trouillot proposes on page 13 that we examine the construction of the West and how it has built our geography of imagination. This idea is complicated by globalization, which brings the West to more of a conceptual status than a locational status. On page 12, Trouillot says that the most enlightened are only part-time citizens of part-time communities of imagination.
History is told from the West's perspective. This narrative is guided by conquest as a guiding factor. This colonization and war resulting in the narrative and perspective which shapes our geography of imagination was, in Trouillot's opinion, in the pursuit of utopia. These expected utopias were both rare and inferior. Under this frame, narrative, and goal, anthropology's conception began with expansionism and travel descriptions as outlined on page 16. Such globalism blurred the artificial divisions created and upheld by the permeative nature of the Western narrative. Eventually, these travel accounts met science and produced early anthropology. Were early ethnographers trying to build a utopia by studying the other in order to understand themselves? On page 19, Trouillot connects the birth of social sciences to the geography of imagination produced by the idea of the West by saying that by the time the social sciences were standardized in degree-granting departments, non-Western areas and peoples were thought to be fundamentally different in both essence and practice.
This discussion about the West and the other reminded me of Hegel's Lordship and Bondage piece. After the war flashbacks from trying to read that piece subsided, it made me think about how the West defines itself through the idea of the savage. To fix the issues within anthropology, Trouillot believes that we need to destroy anthropology's slot, shift definition of savages, and reject the old theories and categories of anthropology. This is discussed on pages 23 through 26. Lastly, Trouillot discusses how these goals can be executed in research and ethnography. He also alleviates some of the guilt that anthropologists feel for the field's role in colonization by asserting that anthropology did not create the savage on page 28. Rather, the idea of the savage created a slot of inquiry which anthropology simply filled.
Compared to the reading by Fabian, Trouillot has some similar concepts. While Fabian talks about another time, allochronism, Trouillot focuses on another place, utopia. Simpson's piece offers a good example of how groups are defined by what they aren't and the other groups which they are not, and how to connect all of this to colonialism. Said also has a similar solution to anthropology's problems, suggesting that we should study our relationship to the other rather than their relationship to us. Clifford and Jordan call into question how this can be done in practice with writing.
For class this week, I want you to consider these connections, and I also want you to consider Trouillot himself. How do you think his history and personal context affected his work? Also, why do you think he chose to use utopia specifically as a central piece of his argument? What does this meaning-laden word imply? Also, do you think that anthropology has done everything it can to mitigate its past? What should be done going forward? Let me know in class.